Hey everyone, quick look at this. See that? Almost 98% of you watching aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is the best way to not miss any new infidelity stories and support what we do here. It's free and it makes a huge difference. Hit that subscribe button below. Okay, now to today's story.
Sometimes I sit here, in this quiet, and I think back to when I really believed my life was, well, perfect. Not movie star perfect, but the kind of perfect where you wake up next to the same person for 20-something years and you just know things are good, solid, like an old oak tree that's seen a few storms but is still standing strong. Paul and I, we had our routines, our little jokes, even our Saturday morning ritual of him making his burnt toast. He could never figure out the toaster settings, bless his heart, and me pretending to be surprised. We went to the same book club, even if he mostly just skimmed the books and nodded along when I talked about the characters. We gardened together, him grumbling good-naturedly about the weeds while I fussed over my roses. It wasn't exciting, maybe, but it was comfortable. It was us. Looking back now, it feels almost silly how blind I was. Or maybe not blind, just trusting. That's what marriage is supposed to be, right? Trust. You build a life with someone. You share your secrets, your dreams, your soggy, burnt toast mornings. You don't expect them to be, well, doing what he did. It started small, the little things that, at the time, I just brushed off. Paul, who always had his phone, glued to his hand for work, suddenly became even more attached to it. He'd be in the bathroom, and I'd hear the little ding of a message, and when I'd ask who it was, he'd just say, "Oh, it's just work stuff." Late at night, I'd sometimes wake up and see the glow of his screen in the dark, him hunched over it, typing away. When I'd ask him about it in the morning, he'd be all vague, saying it was some urgent email from the West Coast. Now, I ain't no dummy. I worked as a secretary for years. I know how emails work. Urgent emails usually don't wait until 2 in the morning. Then there were the changes in him. He started dressing a little different, buying new shirts that were a bit too young for him, if you ask me. He even started using some fancy cologne that I didn't recognize. It wasn't his usual Old Spice. I remember once I teased him about it, saying he smelled like he was trying to impress someone. He just laughed it off, a little too quickly maybe, and said it was a gift from a client. Clients don't usually give their accountants expensive cologne, do they? At least not the ones Paul worked with. They were mostly worried about their taxes, not their scent. I tried to ignore it, I didn't want to be one of those wives, the ones who snoop and suspect every little thing. It felt undignified. But those little things, they started to pile up, like dust bunnies under the bed. You try to ignore them, but eventually they get so big you can't help but trip over them. One evening, he said he had to work late. Again. It was becoming a regular thing, these late nights at the office. But something felt different. That night, he seemed jumpy when he told me, like he was expecting me to question him. And for the first time, I did. I asked him what project he was working on that required so many late nights. He mumbled something about a big audit, but he wouldn't make eye contact with me. That's when the little seed of doubt that had been planted started to sprout roots. Told myself I was being silly. Paul was a good man. We had a good life. Why would he? But the feeling wouldn't go away. It gnawed at me, like a persistent toothache. I couldn't sleep that night. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What if? What if I was wrong? The thought of being wrong was almost as scary as the thought of being right. The next day, he left for work like usual. But after he was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like a knot in my stomach, tightening with every passing minute. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't help myself. I went into his office. His phone was still on the charger on his desk. He usually took it with him everywhere. That was the first red flag, right there. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I knew his passcode. It was the year we got married. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. What if I found nothing? Would I feel better or worse? I didn't know, but I had to know. I just had to. I went to his messages. There were a lot of work emails, just like he said. But then I saw a name, Lisa. It wasn't a name I recognized. There were a lot of messages back and forth. My fingers trembled as I tapped on the conversation, and that's when my world tilted. On its axis, the messages. They weren't just friendly, they were intimate. Talking about how much they missed each other, how they couldn't wait to see each other again. There were hearts and kisses and all sorts of things that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just a work thing. It was something else, something much worse. I remember just standing there, in his office, the phone clutched in my hand, feeling like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My perfect little world, the one we had built together, brick by painstaking brick, suddenly felt like it was made of sand, and the tide had just come in. It was all washing away, right in front of my eyes. And in that moment, the trusting wife I had been for so long, she kind of disappeared, and something else took her place. Something angrier. And a whole lot more determined to find out just how far this thing had gone. For a while there, I just stood frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. My mind was racing a mile a minute, but at the same time, it felt completely blank. It was like my brain couldn't quite process what my eyes were seeing. Paul? My Paul? The man who still left the toilet seat up even after 20 years of me asking him not to? That Paul was sending lovey-dovey messages to some woman named Lisa? It just didn't seem real. Then, the shock started to wear off, and the anger kicked in. It was like a fire starting in my chest, spreading quickly through my whole body. How could he? How could he do this to me? To us? We had a good life? Or at least I thought we did. Was I that blind? That stupid? I sat down heavily in his desk chair, the phone still in my hand. I scrolled back through the messages, reading every single one. The more I read, the angrier I got. They talked about secret lunches, stolen moments, things they couldn't wait to do together. It was like a whole other relationship happening right under my nose, and I had no idea. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I ran to the little bathroom off his office and just barely made it to the toilet before I was sick to my stomach. It wasn't just the betrayal that made me sick. It was the realization that our whole life, the one I thought was so solid, was a lie. When I finally felt like I could breathe again, I went back to the desk. I knew I couldn't just confront him right then and there. I didn't have all the facts. And honestly, I was scared of what he might say, or what he might not say. I needed more. I needed to know exactly what was going on. That's when the idea started to form in my head. It wasn't a nice idea, not the kind of idea that would make my Sunday school teacher proud. But it was an idea that felt right. I was hurt and I was angry and I wanted him to feel the same way, maybe even worse. I started going through his phone more carefully. I looked at the dates of the messages, trying to piece together how long this had been going on. It looked like it had been going on for months. Months. All those times he said he was working late, all those weekends he was out of town for a conference. It all started to make a sickening kind of sense. Took pictures of the messages with my own phone. I knew I needed proof. He was the kind of man who would probably try to deny everything if I just told him what I found. But pictures don't lie, do they? I also looked through his call history. There were a lot of calls to Lisa, mostly late at night or early in the morning. I wrote down her number in my little notepad that I kept in my purse. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed it. I felt like a detective in one of those old movies, piecing together clues. Except this wasn't a movie. This was my life, and the stakes were a lot higher than solving a crime. My marriage, my future, everything I thought I knew was on the line. I put his phone back on the charger, trying to make it look like I hadn't touched it. My hands were still shaking as I left his office. I felt dirty, like I had been snooping, where I shouldn't have. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I was taking control of the situation. I wasn't just going to sit back and let him walk all over me. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions, making dinner, watching TV, trying to act normal. But inside, I was a mess. Every time Paul looked at me, smiled at me, I felt a pang of anger and hurt. How could he be so normal? So oblivious to the bomb that was about to explode in our lives. That night, after Paul had gone to sleep, I got out my notepad and looked at Lisa's number. I didn't know what to do with it. Should I call her? Should I text her? What would I even say? I thought about it for a long time. I imagined all sorts of scenarios in my head. Maybe she was some young, naive girl who didn't know Paul was married. Or maybe she was a cold-hearted homewrecker who knew exactly what she was doing. Either way, I felt like I needed to know more about her. Finally, I decided to do a little digging. I went to my computer and typed her name into the search engine, along with the city she lived in. I had seen it in one of the messages. It took a little while, but eventually I found something. A Facebook profile. I clicked on it, my heart pounding in my chest. There she was, a woman with blonde hair and a bright smile. She looked normal. Not like some femme fatale out of a movie. She had pictures of her with friends, pictures of her dog, even pictures of her with Paul. My stomach dropped. There were pictures of them together, smiling, holding hands, like they were a couple. And they were recent. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just some little flirtation. This was real, and it had been going on for a long time. I felt a cold fury wash over me. They thought they could get away with this? They thought they could make a fool out of me? They had another thing coming. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind was too busy plotting. I knew I couldn't just let this go. I had to do something. Something to make them pay for what they had done. And as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I started to come up with a plan. It wasn't a pretty plan, but it was mine. And I was going to see it through, no matter what. The next few weeks were weird. I was living a double life. On the outside, I was still the same old April, going to book club, tending my roses, making burnt toast for Paul on Saturdays. But on the inside, I was like a completely different person. I was consumed with this plan, this need to make them pay. It was like a dark cloud hanging over me, but at the same time, it gave me a strange kind of energy. I started gathering evidence. I took more pictures of the messages on Paul's phone whenever I got the chance. I even started recording some of his phone calls with Lisa. He'd go out on the porch to talk sometimes, thinking I couldn't hear him, but I'd be right inside, with my phone recording everything. It felt sneaky, but I didn't care. They were being sneaky too, and they were the ones who started it. I also did some more digging into Lisa. Turns out she worked at the same company as Paul, just in a different department. That made my blood boil even more. They were seeing each other at work. All those times Paul said he had a late meeting, he was probably with her. It was disgusting. I even drove by Lisa's house a few times, just to see what she looked like in person. It was a nice little house with a well-kept garden. She seemed ordinary. That made it even more confusing. What did Paul see in her that he didn't see in me? We had a whole life together. We had history. I talked to my friend Betty about it. Well, not all of it. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole truth. I just said that I was having some problems with Paul, that things weren't going so well. Betty, bless her heart, she tried to be supportive. She told me that all marriages have their ups and downs, that we just needed to communicate better. If only she knew the half of it. The hardest part was acting normal around Paul. He didn't suspect a thing. He'd come home from work, kiss me on the cheek, and ask about my day. I'd just smile and say everything was fine, while inside I was screaming. It felt like I was living a lie, but I knew I had to keep it up until I was ready to make my move. Thought about confronting them privately, just calling them both in and laying it all out on the table. But that didn't feel satisfying enough. They had hurt me in front of the whole world, in a way. They had betrayed my trust, made me look like a fool. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions, and I wanted everyone else to know what they had done. That's when I came up with the idea of the anonymous email. I knew Paul had a lot of professional contacts, people he worked with, clients, even some of his old college buddies. And I knew Lisa probably had her own circle of friends and colleagues. What if I sent an email to all of them, telling them about the affair? It would be public, it would be humiliating, and it would definitely get their attention. It took me a while to figure out exactly what I wanted to say. I didn't want to sound like some crazy, scorned woman. I wanted to be factual, to just lay out the evidence and let people draw their own conclusions. I spent hours drafting and redrafting the email, making sure I had all my ducks in a row. I included some of the pictures I had taken of the messages. I didn't want anyone to think I was making it up. I also mentioned some specific dates and times that I knew they had been together, things I had pieced together from his phone records and his calendar. I even added a little bit of humor, a tiny jab here and there. Like when I mentioned Paul's new cologne and how it must have been a special love potion that Lisa was particularly fond of, or when I joked about how much extra work he seemed to be doing lately. I figured a little bit of sarcasm might make the email more engaging, more likely to be shared. I created a fake email address, something that wouldn't be traced back to me. I didn't want Paul to know it was me right away. I wanted him to squirm, to wonder who knew his dirty little secret. Finally, after weeks of planning and gathering evidence, I was ready. I had the email written. I had the list of recipients compiled. I had my finger hovering over the send button. It was a moment of truth. Once I sent that email, there would be no going back. Our lives would never be the same. I took a deep breath and clicked send. It felt anticlimactic at first. Nothing happened right away, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The email was out there, floating in cyberspace, making its way to all those inboxes. And when it landed, I knew the fallout would be significant. I sat there for a while, just staring at the computer screen. A part of me felt a little bit scared. What had I done? Was I making a mistake? But another part of me felt a sense of satisfaction. I had taken action. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was in control. The next day at work, I tried to act as normal as possible, but I could feel the tension in the air. People were whispering, looking at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. I even saw a few of Paul's colleagues giving him strange looks. I knew my email had landed. Paul didn't say anything to me that night. He seemed a little off, maybe a little more quiet than usual, but he didn't mention anything about an email. I wondered if he had even seen it yet, or maybe he was just trying to play it cool. The next morning, though, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of Paul shouting in the living room. I went out there and saw him standing by the computer, his face red with anger. "What is this?" he roared, turning the laptop screen towards me. There it was, my email, printed out, lying on the coffee table. "What does it look like, Paul?" I said, trying to sound calm even though my heart was pounding. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you do this?" I just looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel any fear. I just felt strong. "Maybe I did," I said. "Maybe I just got tired of being lied to." The look on Paul's face was something I won't soon forget. It was a mix of shock, anger, and maybe a little bit of fear. He just stood there for a minute, his mouth hanging open like a fish out of water. Then he started yelling. He called me names, said I was crazy, that I was trying to ruin his life. I just stood my ground. I had expected this. I had even braced myself for it. But hearing him actually say those things, it still stung a little. After all, this was the man I had spent half my life with. The man I thought I knew. "Ruin your life, Paul?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You think I'm the one who ruined your life? You're the one who was sneaking around, lying to me, having an affair with some woman from work. You think I was just going to sit back and pretend like nothing was happening?" He tried to deny it, of course. He said the email was a lie, that someone was trying to frame him. But I just pointed to the printout on the coffee table. "Then who sent this, Paul? And how did they know all those things? How did they know about the late nights, the conferences, the new cologne?" He didn't have an answer for that. He just kept yelling, his face getting redder and redder. Finally, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I heard his car screech out of the driveway, and then there was silence. I sat down on the sofa, feeling a little bit shaky. It was over. The secret was out, and my life was about to change in a big way. the phone started ringing off the hook. It was friends, neighbors, even some of Paul's family members. They had all gotten the email. Some of them were shocked, some were sympathetic, and some were just plain nosy. I answered a few calls, but mostly I just let it go to voicemail. I wasn't really in the mood to talk to anyone. Later that day, I got a call from Paul. He sounded different this time. Not angry, but almost desperate. He begged me to take the email back, to tell everyone it wasn't true. He said his job was on the line, that his reputation was ruined. I felt a little bit of satisfaction, I won't lie. He was finally feeling some of the pain that he had put me through. But at the same time, I didn't want to see him completely destroyed. I just wanted him to understand the consequences of his actions. "It's too late, Paul," I said. "The truth is out there. You should have thought about the consequences before you started sneaking around." He kept pleading with me, but I hung up. I knew I had to be strong. I couldn't let him manipulate me again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Paul moved out. There were a lot of awkward conversations with friends and family. Some people took my side, some took his, and some just tried to stay out of it altogether. It was messy and painful, but I got through it. One of the things that surprised me the most was the reaction at work. Paul got suspended pending an investigation. And Lisa, well, let's just say she wasn't exactly the most popular person in the office anymore. I heard through the grapevine that she ended up quitting. Good riddance, I thought. I even got a few messages from people I didn't know, thanking me for exposing Paul. Apparently, I wasn't the only one he had been less than honest with. That made me feel a little less alone, in a strange way. It wasn't all bad, though. Through all the turmoil, I started to realize something. I was stronger than I thought I was. I had been so focused on Paul for so many years that I had kind of lost sight of who I was. Now I had a chance to figure that out again. I started doing things for myself. I joined a new book club, one that actually read the books. I took a pottery class at the community center. I even went on a few dates, although nothing serious came of them. It was scary, being on my own after so long, but it was also liberating. Remember, one day I was in the garden tending my roses. It was a beautiful sunny day, and the flowers were in full bloom. I looked around at my little patch of green, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had gone through something terrible, but I had come out the other side. I was still standing. Paul and I eventually went through a divorce. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't as nasty as it could have been. We didn't have any kids, which made things a little simpler. We divided up our belongings, and that was that. I haven't spoken to Lisa since all of this happened. I don't really have anything to say to her. She made her choices, and I made mine. Sometimes, I think about Paul. I don't hate him anymore. I don't even feel that angry. Mostly, I just feel sad. Sad that things had to end the way they did. Sad for the life we could have had, but didn't. But I don't dwell on it. I've moved on. I have a new life now, one that I'm building for myself. It's not perfect, maybe, but it's mine. And I'm okay with that. Looking back, I can see that what happened with Paul, as awful as it was also a turning point, for me. It forced me to look at myself, to realize that I deserved better. It taught me that I couldn't rely on someone else for my happiness. I had to find it within myself. And you know what? I think I'm finally starting to. The burnt toast. Mornings are a little quieter now, and I still sometimes reach for him in bed out of habit. But the roses are blooming brighter than ever, and I'm learning to enjoy the peace and quiet. Life ain't always easy, but sometimes even the hardest things can lead you to a better place. You just gotta be willing to see it, and maybe, just maybe, have a little bit of a plan. Even if it involves a fake email address and a whole lot of hurt feelings. Sometimes that's just what it takes. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did. Sending that email, exposing Paul and Lisa the way I did. It wasn't exactly the high road, I know that. My Sunday school teacher would probably have had a thing or two to say about it. But you know what? I don't regret it. Not really. Maybe it wasn't the most mature way to handle things. Maybe I could have just confronted Paul privately, or hired a lawyer and quietly filed for divorce. But in that moment, when I saw those messages, when I realized the extent of his betrayal, I wasn't thinking about being mature. I was thinking about being hurt and angry. And I wanted them to feel it too. And they did. Paul lost his job, at least for a while. I heard he eventually found something else, but it wasn't the same. His reputation took a hit, and I'm sure there were plenty of awkward conversations at the golf course. As for Lisa, well, she had to pack up and leave town as far as I know. Sometimes I wonder what happened to her, if she learned anything from all of this. But mostly I think about myself, about how much I've changed. Before all this happened, I was so focused on being a wife, on making Paul happy, on keeping our little world running smoothly, that I kind of forgot about myself. I let my own dreams and ambitions take a back seat. Now things are different. I have more time for myself. I've reconnected with old friends, the ones I kind of drifted away from when Paul and I were so wrapped up in our own little bubble. I've even started volunteering at the local animal shelter, something I always wanted to do but never had the time for. Those furry little faces, they don't judge you for your past mistakes or your slightly vengeful tendencies. They just want to scratch behind the ears. I've also learned a lot about people, about how appearances can be deceiving. Paul and I, we looked like the perfect couple. Everyone always said so. But underneath it all, there were cracks. Cracks that I didn't see, or maybe didn't want to see. And I've learned that you can't really know what's going on in someone else's marriage, no matter how perfect it looks from the outside. People put on a brave face. They hide their problems. They try to keep up appearances. But sometimes the truth eventually comes out, one way or another. I've even learned a little bit about forgiveness. Not for Paul, not entirely anyway. But for myself. I had a lot of guilt at first, about snooping through his phone, about sending that email. But eventually I realized that I was just trying to protect myself. I was reacting to being hurt and betrayed. And while maybe I didn't handle it perfectly, I did what I felt I had to do at the time. Life isn't a fairy tale. There are no guarantees of happily ever after. People make mistakes, they hurt each other, things fall apart. But you know what? You pick up the pieces, you dust yourself off, and you keep going. You learn from it, you grow from it, and you try to build something new. Something that's maybe not perfect, but it's real. It's yours. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I think back to those early days with Paul. The good times, the laughter, the way we used to hold hands when we walked down the street. It wasn't all bad, you know? There were good moments too, and I'll always cherish those memories. But I can't let them hold me back. I've got a whole new chapter to write now, a chapter that's all about me. And I'm kind of excited to see where it goes. Maybe there will be more burnt toast mornings in my future, maybe not. Maybe there will be someone else to share them with, maybe not. But either way, I'll be okay. I know that now. I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. And sometimes, you just need a little shake-up to realize that, even if that shake-up involves a little bit of, well, you know, a little bit of unexpected exposure. It wasn't pretty, but it got me here. And here, well, here feels pretty good. Looking back on everything now, it feels like a lifetime ago. That whole mess with Paul and Lisa, it was a really hard time. There were days I didn't think I'd ever feel normal again. But you know what? I did. And in a way, I think I'm even better off now than I was before. Going through all that, it really opened my eyes. I used to think I had it all figured out. I thought I knew Paul. I thought I knew what our life was going to be like. But life, it throws you curveballs sometimes. And people, well, people are complicated. They do things you never expect. Even the people you think you know best. I learned that things aren't always what they seem on the surface. Paul and I, we looked like we had this perfect marriage, but underneath there were things going wrong that I just wasn't seeing. Or maybe I was choosing not to see them. It's easy to get comfortable, to just go along with things, even when something feels a little off. But sometimes you gotta pay closer attention. I also learned that you can't control other people's actions. Paul made his choices, and I had to deal with the consequences. It wasn't fair, and it hurt like hell. But I couldn't change what he did. All I could control was how I reacted to it. And that's where the growth came in, I think. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. I went through something really tough, something that could have broken me, but it didn't. I picked myself up, dusted myself off, and kept going. I figured out how to be okay on my own. And that's a powerful feeling, knowing you can handle whatever life throws your way. It also made me think a lot about why people do the things they do. Why would Paul, someone I loved and trusted, do something like that? I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will. But I think it comes down to the fact that people are just human. They make mistakes. They get tempted. They get confused about what they want. It doesn't make it right, not by a long shot, but it makes it a little bit easier to understand, maybe. Not to forgive, not necessarily, but to understand that we're all just trying to figure things out as we go along, and sometimes we mess up pretty bad. But even when things feel really dark, when you think you can't go on, there's always hope. Things can get better. You can heal. You can find happiness again, even after something like this. It might take time, and it might not look exactly like you thought it would, but it's possible. You just gotta be willing to keep going, to keep believing in yourself, and to be open to whatever comes next. So, that's my story. It wasn't always easy to tell, and there are parts of it that still sting a little. But I wanted to share it, because maybe, just maybe, someone out there has gone through something similar. And if you have, I want you to know that you're not alone. It's okay to feel hurt, it's okay to be angry, and it's definitely okay to pick yourself up and move on. I'd be interested to hear if any of this resonates with you. Have you ever been through a tough time that ended up making you stronger? What are your thoughts on the complexities of relationships and human behavior? Feel free to share your own experiences or thoughts in the comments below. I'm all ears.